Hey guys, it's Jake here with Etrailer. Today we have a 2018 Chevrolet Silverado 3500, and we're going to be taking a look at, and I'm going to show you how to install the Firestone Air Command standard duty onboard air compressor. Adding this onboard air compressor is going to allow you to easily inflate and deflate your airbags that you have on your rear axle. But having onboard air, or having this air compressor run in line with this system with the airbags, is going to make you want to use them as much as possible. If you do not have an air compressor paired with your airbags, you're going to have to either stop at a gas station and find some free air, or have to pay for it, or carry an air compressor in your truck to inflate and deflate your airbags. That is not going to make you want to use them very much. The thing that I like most about having an air compressor with your airbags is that if you're driving down the road and you feel like you don't have quite enough pressure in the airbags and it's a little too soft in the rear end, what you can do is you can just add a little bit of air, maybe add 10 or 15 PSI. Maybe that's a little too stiff. And then when you're headed down the road, you can let a little bit out. It just makes you want to use your airbags more, and it'll make you find the exact ride height that you want for your truck. This particular system is going to run just off of the app. We have other systems that will come with a remote. I personally prefer the systems that come with a remote because then I don't have to get my phone out in order to add or subtract airbags. Everybody knows that when you're headed on a trip, you've either got your GPS or some songs playing on your phone, so just using your phone for one more thing. I don't really like that idea, but it's also nice to not have one more remote on the inside of your vehicle. So it's really up to you what you want to do. But in order to use the remote, what's nice about it is you will have the faults that'll show on here, and then the status of the compressor, and then obviously the home screen where you can add PSI. You'll have two presets on here. You'll hear the compressor. There, the compressor just turned on. This compressor is not very loud at all, so you could definitely use it early in the morning or late at night at the campsite. If you get unhooked from your trailer and you want to let the air out, you could definitely do that, and it's not going to cause a whole lot of ruckus for the people next door. But what I like about this is you have two presets. One that I would recommend setting at 5 PSI, which is the lowest amount of air that you can have in your airbags, and the lowest that the compressor itself will go. The other preset, I would say to set that at the PSI that you figure out what will be the most common trailer that you're going to pull. So if you have a camper that you pull, or maybe a dump trailer that you pull all the time, figure out what PSI works best for that trailer when it's loaded, and just set that as your memory 2. And then whenever you hook up to that trailer, all you do is press memory 2, and it's going to go straight to that PSI. For example, this is going to be 20. The max PSI rating for this particular compressor setup is going to be 100 PSI, which is a little low when paired with the heavy-duty airbags that we have on here. I can tell you that the airbags that we have on here are rated for 150 PSI. You will never, ever get anywhere close to that rating. That is an extreme amount of weight that you would have to have on there to put even 100 PSI in. On the standard duty bags, which are the 5,000 pound load carrying bags, I've seen people maybe do up to 70 PSI, but even at that point, the airbags are very, very hard, and it's very uncomfortable if you don't have that extreme weight on top of them. I would say your normal running PSI would probably be anywhere between 30 and 50 PSI, which this compressor will be able to handle with no problem. The one thing I will say about this particular compressor, and we'll show you it here in a little bit, is that the compressor is very small, and it's going to work off a check valve. So it's basically going to pump 1 PSI in at a time, and it's going to basically hold that air, and it's going to slowly work up to the amount that you are wanting. If you're going from 5 PSI to 65 PSI, it's probably going to take about a minute to get up there. A lot of people will confuse this particular kit with the full onboard air kit that has a reserve tank that is maxed out at like 200 PSI. If you put air into your airbags with that kit, it'll pump right up to 50 PSI as if you're connected to an air chuck at your house or something. So just keep in mind that this does not have a reserve tank, so it will have to work up to the desired PSI. This is what our kit's going to look like when it's installed. You can see that I made a bracket to mount both of our components to. We're going to have our compressor right here and our ECU right here. I mount them to a bracket because if I ever have an issue with it, I can disconnect all of these hoses and stuff and the wiring, and then pull that whole bracket down and look at my whole system to see what the issue is. If you decide to mount these directly to the frame, you're going to have to take all 4 self-tapping screws out of the compressor, and then all 4 self-tapping screws out of the the 2 self-tappers out of the ECU, and get it back onto the ground. My personal opinion is less holes in the frame that we add, the better, and that also helps you get everything down and in front of you so you can check it out and really take a look at it. One thing I will add about this particular compressor is that it is not submersible, so you cannot submerge it in water. It is water resistant and weather resistant, so it can be outside. It's just if you plan on getting your truck pretty deep into water, like if you're wanting to launch it at a boat ramp or something like that, just make sure that you have it high enough to where it won't be completely underwater. And that rating really is more so designed when it's running, so you're not supposed to be able to run it when it's underwater, but it also can't be underwater for a very long period of time. It's just the seals and stuff like that. So just something to keep in mind. Usually mounted on the frame, you're pretty safe, because as long as you're not getting into water any deeper than the axle of the vehicle, you won't get the compressor wet up there. So, but with that being said, we're gonna jump into the installation. Beginner installation, we're going to get our compressor and our ECU mounted up to a small bracket. You can just bolt these directly to the frame if you want. I just like to mount it to a bracket just in case something happens with the ECU or the compressor. Then I can take the whole bracket down, I can look at all the parts and components and see what the problem is. It's also a lot easier to bolt the components to this, and then we're just gonna use self-tappers and tap this right into the frame. A couple things we did here to make it a lot easier to put this stuff together is, first off, we mounted it to our bracket. This is just a bracket that I made out of some sheet metal. The other thing is you're gonna wanna put this fitting on the end here. An airline will go in here, we'll show you that in a minute. There's gonna be some Loctite or thread locker on the end of the threads. You wanna thread that in until you can't see them anymore. And then on the end here, we're gonna have a little fitting that eventually our air filter will go on. So just thread this fitting into the end of our compressor. Now we're gonna take a small piece of airline tube. We're gonna pop it into place there. A good way to know that you have it all the way into the fitting is that if you watch these letters and numbers here on the side of the tubing, you'll feel it go in, and then you'll pop in the rest of the way, and that's it getting past the O-ring inside, which is what's gonna give it the good seal. We'll grab one of our T-fittings, slide it into place. Again, make sure it pops into place. And then we'll grab another piece of airline. I just need a piece of airline to go from this T-fitting down to our ECU. So probably a 2-inch piece or so. Whenever you're cutting this airline tubing, you wanna make sure it's a nice straight cut. Just like that. Should be a good length there. Make sure it's in all the way. Pop that in. Now what we've done here is I just took my bracket, I held it up to my frame rail. You want to make sure that your ECU is in this orientation. You cannot have it facing any other direction. It needs to be pointed out, and then the plug for our electric needs to be on the left side of our inlet here for our air. That main reason is because this little hole here on the bottom is our exhaust, so it needs to be able to air out properly. So we've got our holes marked on our frame. We drilled those out. You can use self-tappers, you can use bolts. This frame is really difficult to get bolts through because it is a box frame. So that's why we just went with some self-tappers. And we're just gonna run these in through the holes that we've already got lined up. Now what we need to do is we need to run some airline tubing back to the airbags. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do that, then we'll come back and show you, and then we're going to run the wiring and do the same thing. We'll come back and show you the route. Watching that process is incredibly boring, and it takes some time. So I'll just do it, and then we'll come back and show you the exact route that I took. You'll start with your airline coming out of your T-fitting that we just put into our ECU. I ran it up and over top of our frame. You want to try to zip tie it to wiring or any tubing anytime you can to stay away from anything hot or moving. On top of our frame rail is one of our main wiring harness, so you know that stuff is safe because the manufacturer put it there. So just zip tie it off to that. I ran it all along the frame rail, just zip tying it along the way to any wiring or anything that I can find. Run it over top of the shock mount, and then up here, you're gonna wanna put a T in. We'll tee it off. One side will go down to the airbag, the other side will continue on. As you can see, we went over top of our factory hitch, which is that's our puck system. And then we went into another T, down out of the T, into our driver's side airbag, out of the T, across this wiring, back over here, tied it off to some more wiring. And then we use the included bracket that comes with the airbags. One should come with the airbags and with the air compressor kit. And we just mounted our single air fitting here for our manual fill. And then for our airline that is going to our air filter, we just took the tubing, slid it over this fitting, ran it up, and we didn't end up using the whole length. The whole length is like 4 feet long. We just used about 2.5 feet of it, ran it up, and then zip tied it to existing wiring on top of our frame rail. Now when it comes to running your wiring, what we did was you'll see here we have a connection that we had to make. You'll just take your red wire and then the blue connector that's on our wiring harness, the big wire loom, you'll connect those together. The plug, you'll want to insert that into the ECU. And then for our ground, all I did was just back our self-tapper out since it's going into the frame, and we just put it right back in with our ground wire. And then as for running the wires, we just followed our factory wiring that's on top of the frame all the way up to the front, behind the DEF system. And then once we got up here, I stopped, went up to the engine compartment, fish wired some extra airline tubing that we had from running it to our airbags. We didn't have to use it all. So I ran some airline tubing down and then pulled our wiring right up into our engine bay. Now with our wire up into our engine bay, I highly recommend zip tying it off like on the way up so that if something were to ever happen, it doesn't fall back down in there. Another thing that I really like to do is if I know I'm not going to be using the extra length, I just take some electrical tape. It takes a lot of it, but I like to just wrap it up so it's in a nice, neat spool, and we can tuck it down in here and not have to worry about dealing with it. Then we have our positive lead, which is right here. You'll know it's got the cap like this. We just took that cap off, took the fuse that was in it out, because you don't want it in there when you make this connection. This one's going to have to connect to our positive post, and then our negative post, this yellow wire we're not going to have to use. That is just a signal wire. And then the red wire here, or the red butt connector, or the ring terminal is going to be our ground wire. So that's why I have this routed back under here. This we're going to connect to the negative post, then we'll get this connected to our positive. Now we've got our negative hooked up to the battery, or positive hooked up to it. I just took this cover off, unscrew this access point with a 10mm socket. You can put the positive post right underneath it. Again, we're not hooking up the yellow wire. Now we can take our fuse, put it in the fuse holder, and then we had our app pulled up, and it said that we had one device that was discovered, and it should have linked up with it, but because the owner of this vehicle ended up going with just the app only and didn't get the remote. So you can see here, everything is loading up on it. Once your app is done loading and done syncing up, it should come to a screen just like this. And then we're just gonna bump it up to about 15 PSI to make sure our compressor kicks on, which it just did. We'll make sure that it goes up to 15 and stops there. And then what we can do is go underneath and we'll check all of our fittings for leaks. But in order to do that, we're gonna put it at a much higher PSI, probably about 50, so that we have enough pressure to check those leaks. We'll just take some soapy water, spray it on each one of these fittings, and you wanna make sure that you're not finding any rapid bubbles forming at the insertion point here for our airline tubing. If you do, all you have to do is just take that fitting out, make a cleaner cut, and put it back in. Make sure that your airlines are all the way pushed in. A lot of times that's the reason why they'll leak. Well guys, that's gonna do it for the installation.